Do you believe in fairies? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a Scottish-born writer, best known, of course, for his Sherlock Holmes stories, though he also wrote many other books and stories, including The Lost World, which is a kind of precursor to Jurassic Park. He was raised as a Roman Catholic, but later became an agnostic and then a spiritualist mystic. What this means is that he believed that an individual's awareness persists after death and may be contacted by the living. So such people would engage in seances and similar activities. The afterlife, or the spirit world, was seen by spiritualists as a place in which spirits continue to interact and evolve. So spirits were more advanced morally and spiritually than those of us still stuck here in this reality. They're capable of advising the living on moral and ethical issues, and maybe on the nature of God. Some spiritualists will follow a specific spirit guide as some kind of mentor. So there we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the protagonist of our story. In 1917, 9-year-old Frances Griffiths and her mother, both newly arrived in the UK from South Africa, were staying with Frances's aunt, Elsie Wright's mother, in the village of Cottingley in West Yorkshire. Elsie was then 16 years old. The two girls often played together at the bottom of the garden. It was a very wet and muddy area, and the girls got into trouble for bringing mud back into the house. The girls said that they'd only gone there to see the fairies that they claimed frolicked down there. To prove it, Elsie borrowed her father's camera and took 5 photographs, which became known as the Cottingley fairies. And now we bring Arthur Conan Doyle back into the story, because he was convinced that these images were genuine. He believed that these girls really had been playing with fairies down at the bottom of the garden, and that these photographs were proof of that. In a book he published in 1922 called The Coming of the Fairies, Doyle described his beliefs about the nature and existence of fairies and spirits, reproduced these photographs, and asserted that those who suspected them of being faked were wrong. In an article in the 1920 issue of The Strand, Conan Doyle wrote of fairies in response to these images: "The recognition of their existence will jolt the material 20th century mind out of its heavy ruts in the mud, and will make it admit that there is a glamour and mystery to life. Having discovered this, the world will not find it so difficult to accept that spiritual message supported by physical facts which have already been put before it." Decades later, the photos were definitively shown to have been faked, and their creators admitted to the fakery, that they'd used cardboard cutouts, although Frances maintained that the final of the 5 photographs was genuine, and both girls maintained that they really had seen fairies. So my point in this story is to demonstrate that even some very intelligent people can believe some very silly things, and particularly if this serves their agenda in some way. The photographs weren't faked in the technical sense, in the sense of having been manipulated in some way in the photo lab. They were genuine photographs of the girls with these cardboard cutouts. But the fact that they weren't faked in this technical sense was enough to convince Doyle that the girls really had photographed fairies, which served his broader agenda to prove the existence of the spirit realm and, as he put it, to jolt the material 20th century mind out of its heavy ruts in the mud and make it admit that there is a glamour and mystery to life. Doyle is far from being the only intelligent, well-educated person to also have demonstrated a capacity to believe in things for which there is no supporting evidence. The Israeli-American theoretical physicist Avi Loeb, the Frank B. Baird Jr. Professor of Science at Harvard University, has in recent years developed an unhealthy obsession with extraterrestrials. I'd invite you to look at Rebecca Watson, also known as Skepchic's, video on this called Avi Loeb, the Harvard physicist who thinks it's always aliens. She has a very good take on this. He has a tendency to find evidence for extraterrestrial artifacts everywhere he looks. Deepak Chopra is an Indian-American author who's actually qualified as an endocrinologist, but who makes all kinds of woo-woo claims based on his interpretation of quantum physics, which drives actual quantum physicists crazy. I sometimes wonder too about biologist Richard Dawkins and physicist Paul Davies' forays into religion. This is not to say that people can't be quite knowledgeable outside their normal area of expertise. However, their expertise in one area doesn't automatically give them any kind of authority in another area. They will use their platform to promote their ideas on subjects that they know no more about than you or I do. They may eventually earn our respect in these other areas too, but this has to be earned. People who stand out in a particular field are just as prey to becoming obsessed with ideas as you and I are. They're just as likely to dig into a position even when the evidence is against them. They're just as prone to confirmation bias. They're just as capable of underestimating their limitations.